conference together. I think give a very warm PSA welcome to Jane Gunn, the corporate peacemaker.
So we ought to start with Julius Caesar, I thought, and where better to find Julius Caesar than in the Asterix book. And there is Julius Caesar starting off the chariot race, which is called coronavirus. Sometimes you find predictions of the future in the most unusual places. Now, a friend of mine who started dating recently, was arranging to meet a new date in the last couple of weeks. And they were working out where to meet, should they find a pub between their two houses. So they said they located a pub. A couple of days before they were due to meet, he rang and he said, I'm a bit worried about this coronavirus thing. He said, how about, being in a public place, how about we arrive at the pub really early in the afternoon before other people actually start to arrive? Okay, she said. Then the day before they were due to meet, he rang again and he said, I've just seen on the news that somebody has died of coronavirus in Reading. And you live near Reading, don't you? And she said, well, about 7 miles away, and I haven't been there in a while. And he said, yes, but I'm still worried. He said, how about we still drive to the pub, but instead of going in, we park next to each other in adjoining car parking spaces, and we wind down our windows, and we talk to each other. She said, I've got a better idea. She said, how about we stay at home, cook ourselves a nice meal in our own houses, pour a glass of wine, and boot up Skype, and we could have a date that way. And that's what they did. And he was a doctor. And so the question is, how are we as the human race going to survive if we date through adjoining windows in the car park or even via Skype? So I'm known as you know, as the corporate peacemaker, and what I do is I help organisations to manage in times of change, challenge and crisis. Where are we now? Times of change, challenge and crisis. And what I'm really doing is, well, I like to say, I help to make, this is Maurice the Mole, I help people to make molehills out of mountains. What we tend to do in a crisis is we make mountains out of molehills. And actually, when I was running a workshop once, somebody said to me, I know what I've learned from you. I've learned that you can make molehills out of mountains. Now, the difference is, if you make a mountain out of a molehill, you need a lot of people to help you to resolve that problem. If you think of climbing a mountain, you need a lot of equipment, you need a lot of people in your team. If you manage to reduce the size of the problem so it looks more like a molehill, you can solve the problem with one man and a spade. So, my daughter is a GP, and she is genuinely, seriously worried about the coronavirus. She has, in the last few days, every day a little cardboard box arrives and it has another piece of equipment in it. She sent us an oximeter, that measures your blood oxygen level. She sent us a blood pressure meter, and today arrived a digital thermometer. So we're all set up for her to monitor us digitally should we fall ill with the coronavirus. And I think that's great. But it doesn't answer the problem of how do we deal with isolation? How do we actually boost our immune system? How do we manage to nourish our mind, body and spirit in this time? I don't think the GPs, I don't think the government have got the answer to those questions. And one of the interesting things about survivors is that women, and this is documented in various places, are better survivors than men with the same diseases and in the same situations. And the married men survive better than the single men. Single men spend more time in jail, earn less, and get more illnesses than the married men. So if you want to draw one conclusion, if you want to live a long and miserable life, you get married. So survivorship is something that I'm interested in terms of the work that I do. How do people survive crisis? And one of the people I followed for many years is a guy called Al Siebert. Now, Al Siebert wrote a book called The Survivor Personality. So what is a survivor personality? What has he learned in his career of studying survivors that we could all learn and put into practice now? Al Siebert was a resident of Portland in Oregon. And on the 18th of May 1980, I don't know if any of you remember this story, but the Mount St. Helens volcano erupted. And it erupted with the force almost of a nuclear bomb, and it caused huge devastation, and about 57 people died. Now, the thing about Mount St. Helens was, the volcano had been venting for about 2 weeks. There had been many warnings, but actually when it happened, people were standing right next to the volcano taking pictures. They were sitting on bridges with glasses of beer saying this is going to be a good show. And actually they got swept away in the wall of mud and stones and so on. So Al-Sibert said, what can we learn from situations like this? What is it that people don't do that we could learn from that would help us be survivors? And here's what he said. He said, as human beings, when we're faced with a crisis situation, rather as we are now, we tend to deny danger. We say, it's never happened before, it's not going to happen now. I've never seen anything like this, it'll be okay. We obviously all feel like that because we're here today. Disbelief prevails over reality. So we just don't believe, we can't quite believe we're in this situation. It does seem a bit unreal at the moment, doesn't it? And we seldom make plans. So I don't know how many of you would say, I had a plan for this, I have a plan I'm putting into place, I knew something like this was going to happen. Most of us do not have plans. I was quite interested in listening to a clip my sister sent me from Yes Minister. I'll see if I can remember what Sir Humphrey was saying. But he said, first of all, we say nothing's going to happen, so there's nothing we should do. Secondly, we say something may happen, but there's still nothing we should do. Thirdly, we say something is going to happen, but there's nothing we can do. And finally, we say something did happen, and we should have done something, but it's too late now. I think we're all, a little bit like, what do we do, and are we leaving it too late, and so on. The other thing I learned from Al-Sibert, and I think is very relevant to what we might do, and I want to take you through thinking about this, is that there's a difference between what we are taught and what we learn. I don't know how many of you were taught to wash your hands at the age of 1 or 2. We've all been taught to wash our hands for most of our life, but how many of us have been doing it in a way that would actually, at this time of year, prevent you from catching flu or norovirus even? Suddenly, we all say, actually there's a reason for us to wash our hands, and we begin to understand, because we have a level of fear, perhaps. And this is my granddaughter, Ellie. With her new cooker, and what I was thinking is the way that children learn, the way that Ellie learns, is that she crashes about the house. She's coming, she's just arrived at my house actually, so I'm missing her this afternoon, but she'll come to the house and she'll crash about, she'll open cupboards, she'll bang saucepan lids together, and she'll take my purse out of my handbag, and she'll put those, there's no putting bloody hand gel on her, is there really? I mean, she's like everything, everything goes in her mouth and so on. So she is learning through experience, and she wants to learn, what happens when I do things, what impact do I have? If I drop that thing on the floor, will someone pick it up for me, or do I have to pick it up myself? And we're learning that. She sits at her high chair and she doesn't like something to eat. She looks the other way actually, and then she goes, and then she waits to see if we pick it up or we ignore her. But we're beginning to develop a strategy for that. But the thing is, as children, that when you go to school to learn, you learn the lesson and then you take the test. In life, you take the test and then you learn the lesson. Wow. So I'll say that again. When you go to school, you learn the lesson and then you take the test. And you see if you passed. But in life, you take the test and then you learn the lesson. And the lesson for each one of us is completely different. So what lessons do we learn, and what lessons might we learn from what's going on around us now? I have brought one of my favourite props with me. We're talking about developing a vaccine for coronavirus. And there is a theory of communication which relates to this, which is called the injection theory of communication. And what we like to do, and perhaps what governments and perhaps what companies like to do, is they think we've got a marvellous argument for why you should manage this crisis in this way, why you should wash your hands, why you should do things. And what we're going to do is we're going to give you the most powerful argument as to why you should do this. Here is all the data, here are all the facts. Graham Davies and I are lawyers. We're used to crafting legal arguments and being able to persuade, or we think we can persuade others to follow our logic and agree with us and back down and say, absolutely, you're absolutely right, I'm backing down on that. And in fact, we had an example of that, didn't we, earlier, where somebody did actually back down because of your rhetoric, Graham. But the injection theory of communication doesn't actually work in terms of learning. It works in terms of teaching, but it doesn't work in terms of helping you to learn what you might do and what might help you to survive. I had a few things here that I just wanted to share, and this is a little bit workshoppy, but thinking about, here are 7 things that if you're going to learn from something, you need to do. First of all, you need to have an experience. You know, it can be a planned experience, for everyone it's not a planned experience. But going through this process helps you to think about, what have I learned? Can I express what I've learned in terms of feelings and emotions? What did I feel about that? What did I think about that? What actually happened for me? Can I reflect and replay what happened? I think some of us do this in terms of us speaking. What actually happened up there? What did it look like? What did it feel like? Can I describe the experience to someone else and retell it? If you can't, you can write it down. And somebody talked earlier today about journaling. So journaling is telling something to yourself, writing it down, retelling it. And then ask yourself, what did I learn? And then imagining, what might it be like if I did it better? What could I do better? And then rehearse doing it in a better way. So that's a process for actually learning how to do things in a better way. And I'm going to talk a little bit later about this. But Chris Akabusi and I, many of you may not know, we're in a mastermind group together, and we've been in a mastermind group for about 13 years together. And you know, one of the things we're doing in a group like that is to go through a process like this every time we meet, to think, what did you learn from something? You know, how do you process? So the value of those kind of sessions is to have this kind of process. Now, Anthony talked about me leading the world with another initiative. There was another bug a few years ago that threatened the world. This was a bug that threatened us to such an extent that I ended up going to speak at the United Nations about it. I ended up persuading President Clinton's team at the White House to have a meeting with me. I went to the European Commission and I went to speak at the World Bank. It threatened many of our businesses, and what was that bug? It was the Millennium Bug. Does anybody remember? Y2K. Now, what happened with the Y2K bug was that this was it was an IT bug that people thought when the clock rolls over to the year 2000, a lot of systems are going to drop down, and maybe even aeroplanes are going to drop out of the sky. I was thinking about this actually, and that's one job you can't really do remotely, is it fly? Oh, well, maybe you can, but if you get on a plane and they say the pilot's working from home today, I feel a bit disturbed, I think. But we actually thought planes might drop out of the sky, didn't we? And so, what happened with the Millennium Bug? It was one of those coffee, water cooler moments, if you like. I was working for an organisation who had trained me as a mediator in dispute resolution, and I was working there, and I was standing at the coffee cooler, and somebody said, we've got this great big project, and we just, we really need someone to come and help us, because this is what we've had this idea. It's the big companies that are going to struggle if they have Millennium Bug disputes. And if they have Millennium Bug disputes which turn into litigation, and if it really is such a big global thing, the courts are not going to be able to manage. There won't be enough space in the courts. And also, a lot of these disputes would be cross-border disputes. So we have all sorts of issues about which country and which language and which jurisdiction and so on. So might there be a better way to manage this situation. So we came up with the idea of something which was called the Millennium Accord. Now I've only got 2 copies of this left, but I brought one with you here. What we set up was a document called the Millennium Accord. The word accord means agree. I agree. I agree with you. This was sponsored by some big companies. So we had Cable and Wireless, we had Nortel Networks, we had British American Tobacco, and so on. But what we did was we took this document around the world, and my job was, as I say, to go and speak at the UN, at the White House, and so on, but also to introduce this concept to big companies to say, if you sign this document, what you're doing is agreeing that instead of resorting to arms, adversarial resolution methods, instead of being aggressive and starting litigation, we agree that we will collaborate. We agree if we have a problem, we will communicate, we will enter into dialogue. If that doesn't work, we'll mediate, which is what I'm trained to do. If that doesn't work, we'll arbitrate. And only as a final resort will we fight each other. Now, as it turned out, planes didn't drop out of the sky on the 1st of January 2000. But the benefit of this project was that for the first time ever, every company in the world, particularly the big companies, were faced with the same problem at the same time. And so it made them focus their attention on what can we learn from that and what could we do better. And as a result of this Millennium Accord, we were able to instigate this approach within organisations. It became mediation and alternative dispute resolution, a really accepted method of dispute resolution on a global basis. So I've been thinking about what do we learn from what I did, and are there opportunities for us to learn similar lessons from what's happening to us in smaller businesses perhaps. So I talked a little bit about being in a mastermind group, and some of us talk to as well executive groups, you know, Vistage and other kinds of organisations. And I think one of the benefits of working in these kind of groups is that you are being accountable. You say you're going to do something and you do it. You discuss problems and you create a solution to them. But not only that, you promise that you'll follow through on that. So when I wrote my book, I really should throw this in, shouldn't I? How to Beat Bedlam in the Boardroom and Boredom in the Bedroom. I made a promise. So the guy said to me, I sat down with, I'm in the mastermind group with Chris Lakabusi and Steve Head, and I said, I've got this idea for a book. And they said, yeah, but when? When are you going to do this? When are you going to write it, Jim? When's it going to be published? By when? And so I said, yeah, well, maybe. I mean, you know. And they said, no, give us a date. By when you will have written this, by when it will be published, and we'll hold your feet to the fire. By God, he did that. You can imagine, can't you? They did. So this idea of promising, of being accountable and having a pledge, I think is really important, and perhaps something that we can also reflect on. So what I wanted to do is just to think about what are some of the points, let me just summarise some of the points that I've covered, and then I wanted to ask you to think a little bit about what you're learning from this current situation might be and how you might take that forward. So here's my summary. I think the human race can't really survive if we date through car windows. I mean, it's a physical impossibility, isn't it? The human race will not survive. We do need a shift in mindset. This is what I've been working with for the last 20 plus years, is away from this mindset of let's fight and win to let's work together to find a solution. Perhaps focusing on the feminine. Now, you know, I find it interesting. I belong to a yoga group. We have men in my yoga group, but they're few and far between. I belong to a choir. We have men in my choir, but they're few and far between. And I'm interested in this. I belong to a book group. There are no men in my book club. In fact, I went to a dinner party the other day, and the men said, we love the idea that you meet together and have these in-depth conversations about books. We said, we'd like to do that. So while we sat around with glasses of wine, they said, we're going to do it. We're going to set a date in a couple of weeks' time, and we're going to have a book group, just men only. So they set the date, and they got together, and they chose a book. They met up. They poured a glass of beer or a glass of wine. They talked about the book. for about 2 minutes. Then somebody said, anybody got a good video? So they sat in the dark in their glasses of beer and watched a film. And that was how it went. So I'm interested to know, and again it may be something we can reflect on, is what is it that makes us as women more able to attract some of these feminine qualities and use them effectively in business. So I think one of the things I'm seeing, and it's very interesting having my daughter in medicine and me in law, because those are two professions that used to be very male dominated. Now they're female dominated, but sometimes by alpha females. So we're changing, but not fast enough. But I think thinking about what are some of the feminine attributes that help us to be survivors, as I said, may be an interesting discussion. If we deny danger and disbelieve and don't make a plan, we are going to be engulfed by the volcano for sure. The 7-step process might be useful to you, and this idea of making a pledge, I think. So, what I wanted to ask you as an audience is to think about this. Sometimes in our lives there are moments which I call defining moments. And all of you will have had them. And there are moments in my life which define who I am and what I do, and why my approach to my work is as it is. One of my defining moments, and I'm not going to tell the long story, and I did tell it from stage before, but is, and they call them my brown envelope moments, but is being sat down with my mother at the age of 18, and she gives me a brown envelope, and in it is a watch. And the watch has been left for me by my grandmother, who I'd never met. I didn't know who she was, and I believed that my stepbrother and my step-grandmother until that time was my grandmother. So thinking about, then that brought me to the whole thing about family feuds and why did, how could this woman be ostracized from her daughter for so long? So for me, seeing things in black and white and being able to move and see them in a different way has been a learning curve to what I do. And I wonder if you have some moments that you can think about that are defining moments, that define who you are, what you do, where you've actually had to deal with a challenge before and how you've overcome that challenge. And maybe some learnings that you would feed into the situation that we're in now. So let me just close with this. There's a line in a song by Simon and Garfunkel that says, "Hello darkness, my old friend." Hello darkness, my old friend. And why is darkness a friend? Well, I don't know if you remember, I think it was the 5th of August in 2010, when the mine shaft in the Chilean mine collapsed. Anybody remember that? It was well documented. But 69 miners, no, 33, they were 33 miners, they were called Long 33, were trapped below ground for 69 days. 69 days, and I remember we watched it on the news, and they didn't know. You see, they were stuck in the dark, and they didn't know whether they would survive. They didn't know whether their food would survive. And I thought when Anthony asked me, I thought, well, that story has real parallels for us. We're entering this dark phase. We have no idea how long it's going to last. We don't quite know we don't even know if the food is going to last. It's not quite that drastic. I think the miners survived on 1 teaspoon of tuna fish a day, so we're not quite down to that. But it's a similar parallel. And what were some of the things that were documented that helped those miners to survive? Well, one of the things was they had a terrific leader called Louis, and he had a great sense of humour. The other thing was he made them, or he encouraged them, to work as a group, not as individuals. Another thing was there was quite a lot of prayer and support going on above ground and below ground. So there was this sort of sense of, group think going on, which encouraged this positive attitude and belief that they would get out. So what was the other thing I thought? Oh, this was it, looking after each other. They genuinely looked after each other. And I think in today's communities, sometimes we don't do that enough. So thinking about that, why is darkness a friend? Because when you go, and I've asked you to just discuss some of the perhaps issues that were dark times for you, when you go down into the darkness, that's where you find the light. That's where the truth is for you. And, perhaps there are dark times coming, but perhaps we have enough resilience, perhaps we have that light within inside us that can help us to shine. So what I wanted to leave you with was this. 3 thoughts. I think the most dangerous virus is the virus of fear. We can't always battle and fight to win. Sometimes we have to find another way, another mindset. Change, challenge and crisis can only be overcome if we work together. We can't actually work in isolation, and if we are going to work in isolation, we're going to have to communicate in some way with each other. And the only way to predict the future is to make it happen. So I wanted to challenge you, just to finally finish off, to do 3 things. 1, be a beacon of light. Be a beacon of light in your community, be a beacon of light in your family, be a beacon of light for those that need you. Secondly, plan. How are you going to deliver your message? How are you going to serve those that need help? How are you going to do that? And thirdly, promise. Make a pledge. Make a pledge to actually do those things. And so I'm going to finish again with Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar from William Shakespeare, who said, "There is a tide in the affairs of men, which if taken at the flood, leads to great opportunity." So let's look for that opportunity. Thank you.